Chapter 13. The Invisible Man. Tobias Rook was 16 when his mother found him cleaning the kitchen counter with a bucket and sponge. Guinevere Rook entered the room, took one look at him, and gave him a disapproving frown. Without a word, she raised her wand. The sponge sprang from Tobias's hand, floated neatly to the bucket, dipped itself into the water, wrung itself out, and returned to the counter, scrubbing the surface on its own. Tobias watched it for a moment, then looked up. How does the spell work? His mother did not answer the question. Magic doesn't explain itself, she said. It obeys. Tobias looked back at the sponge as it moved across the counter. Something in his expression shifted. She doesn't know how it works, he realized. And then the thought followed naturally. Magic users don't understand magic the way they think they do. At the Auror office, Robards brought Harry and Ron another report. The bank sent an owl this morning, he said. They didn't report a theft, but a magical inconsistency. They're requesting assistance. Harry looked up. An inconsistency? Robards nodded. They didn't call it a break-in, and nothing was taken. That was enough to get their attention. Soon after, the Aurors were on their way to Gringotts Bank. A goblin named Migsby met them at the entrance and led them into a high-security corridor on the first level of the bank. He was cold toward them, speaking only when necessary. The corridor was lined with doors on both sides, each one marked and protected. Migsby stopped beside a door labeled Stability Control Logic Systems. Ron glanced at it. Nothing looks wrong. The goblin drew a silver wand-like instrument from his coat. It was shiny, compact, and looked nothing like a human wand. And yet, Migsby said. He waved the instrument at the door, and the tip spun and sparked. Ron frowned. Okay, what does that mean? It is a tamper detector, Migsby said flatly. This door has been tampered with. Harry's gaze sharpened. Did they get in? No, Migsby answered. We believe they were testing it. Harry looked at the door. What's in there? Migsby's answer came with clear contempt. It is the Stability Control Logic Systems room. Ron rolled his eyes. What does it do? It controls the protective wards and enchantments that protect the bank. Harry's expression darkened as he understood the implications. Migsby continued. First, the blueprints were stolen. Now this. If the ministry cannot see that someone is planning to rob the bank, then you are blind. Ron, thinking aloud before he could stop himself, said, Who would be crazy enough to try and rob Gringotts? Harry and Migsby both turned to look at him. Ron immediately realized what he had said and tried to recover. Well, that was different. Migsby did not appear amused. The bank is losing confidence in the ministry's ability to deal with threats to our security. This needs to be addressed before it is too late. Harry and Ron examined the door and the surrounding hall. There was no damage, no residue, no obvious trace of magic at all. Again, Ron said, no magic. So how was it tampered with? Harry asked. Ron stared at the door. Looks like it wasn't. Looks like nothing happened. Harry shook his head. No, something did. They moved farther down the corridor so they could compare the magical residue away from the door itself. At the far end of the hall, a maintenance worker was entering with a pushcart full of cleaning supplies. Tobias Rook pushed the cart calmly down the hall, head lowered, but his eyes were on Harry and Ron the whole time. As he approached, he came up behind Ron and nudged the cart aside to pass. Sorry, Ron said, stepping over. Harry glanced up at the man as he went by. Tobias continued down the corridor at the same measured pace. Back at the Auror office, Robards was pacing. Harry and Ron could feel the pressure he was under. This was no longer just an odd theft pattern or an isolated security issue. This was something bigger, and the ministry knew it. Well, Robards said, when this gets out, we'll have panic on top of panic. He looked directly at them. I don't care if it's a ghost, a myth, or a janitor. Find him before this turns into something much worse. The minister is going to set the curfew to 8 p.m. Harry caught on to something in that sentence and let it sit in his mind. He and Ron moved into the evidence room and spread files, maps, and notes across an empty table. Ron flipped through the Gringotts access logs. No forced entry, no motion alerts, no spell work, no magic, and no witness. Harry asked, who was the last one logged in that corridor that day? Ron ran his finger down the page. Maintenance. That got Harry thinking. Ron looked up. Hey, what if they didn't break in? What if they were already inside? Harry's eyes sharpened. Brilliant. That's it. They pulled records and personnel logs from ministry workers with access to Gringotts, maintenance entrance sign-in sheets, security lists, work orders. One name kept appearing. Tobias Rook. Ron squinted at it. He's a janitor, Harry answered. Maintenance. Ron frowned. That can't be right. Most of those workers are squibs, I've heard. Harry did not respond right away. The idea had already begun forming in his head. They started gathering more information. If Tobias Rook was their suspect, then they needed to know how he had done any of this at all. They returned to the places where the incidents had happened and re-interviewed the people involved. Mr. Hollis frowned in concentration. There was a smell, he said. I couldn't remember it before, but now I do. It was strong, bitter. The ministry guard frowned and rubbed his forehead. I just paused. It felt like no time had passed, but now I can remember some time had passed. The collector's guard was even less certain. Someone was there, Harry asked. Who? The guard strained hard to remember. I don't know. Someone who didn't seem affected. It was late in the Auror office when Ron finally leaned back and yawned. So we've got no magic traces, no forced entry, victims left disoriented, and the perp doesn't seem affected. Plus, he disguises himself with a Death Eater mask. Harry was staring at the files. He's not fighting magic. He removes it. Ron looked over. Harry went on, then he walks through what's left. He picked up the file labeled Tobias Rook. In another room, Tobias stood before a controlled setup. A glass box sat on the table, containing a small dispersal device and a vial of purple powder. Inside the same box, a golden snitch fluttered back and forth, bumping the sides as it tried to avoid what was coming. Tobias took a sip of tea, adjusted the lamp so he could see more clearly, and checked his pocket watch. Then he sat down and waited. A moment later, the purple powder turned into vapor. The dispersal device directed the mist straight toward the snitch, which darted frantically from side to side. The mist caught it. The snitch dropped to the floor of the box. Its wings twitched twice. Then it went still. Tobias made a note in his ledger, took another sip of tea, and showed no emotion at all. He then picked up a roll of parchment and set it on the table. A stamp and heading were visible on the corner. Gringotts. Internal structural access. Back in the Auror office, Harry looked at Tobias Rook's file one last time. What is he planning, he said. Then, more quietly, Ron, I think we need to talk to Tobias Rook first thing tomorrow. See what he has to say. I think he's up to something that we aren't seeing.